We made it last week through about verse 11, I think. So again, half the chapter took us over a month, and we'll hopefully do the second half in one day. So let's see. Kathy, would you mind taking that reading for us and do Hebrews 6 verses, how about 11 through the end of the chapter?
Okay. And we desire each one of you to show the same earnestness to have the full assurance of hope until the end, so that you may not be sluggish, but imitators of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. For when God made a promise to Abraham, since he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, "Surely I will bless you and multiply you." And thus Abraham, having patiently waited, obtained the promise. For people swear by something greater than themselves, and in all their disputes, an oath is final for confirmation. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of his purpose, he guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, who we have fled for refuge, might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek.
All right, thank you. So we're picking up in about verse 12. Kind of a tie-in there from 11 to 12. Remember the verses before there, giving the warnings of those who fall away. But you get to verse 9, we know that this isn't you. We're persuaded better things of you, and we talked about how he really commends them, that God is not unrighteous to forget their love, their labor of love, which they have showed by ministering or serving the brothers and sisters in Christ. So a strong priority is put there on their service, tying that into their salvation. So that was a real key point for last week. And you get to 11 and 12, and that exhortation is continuing. We desire that every one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope firm unto the end. In other words, keep doing the good things that you're doing, and every one of you make sure you're doing it. We have a tendency at times that you get a few strong people who are constantly working and doing a lot of good things, and maybe others who say, well, I'm glad it's getting done, glad we have someone who's doing it, and kind of leave it at that. The responsibility is on everybody. There's nobody in the believing community who is exempt from our responsibility of serving our brethren. And there's so many different ways of doing that, but we all need to act and work. And that calling applies to everybody. And we, as easy and comfortable as it might be to put that off on somebody else, it speaks to every single one of us to do those things. And that's a great encouragement there. We desire every one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope unto the end. Never stop. Don't give up, no matter what. And you get to 12, and this is kind of a nice verse that, if we think of Hebrews, probably most of us are more familiar with what chapter. It tends to often come into mind.
11, Hebrews 11?
Chapter 11, what's that all about?
That's the faith chapter.
Yeah, so verse 12, he's kind of hinting at that, right? And he's about to build on that in the next few verses. Don't be slothful. Don't be lazy. Be followers of those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. That's all what chapter 11 is about. People who are not lazy, not slothful. They're acting, they're doing, they believe something, and they're acting on that faith. That's number one encouragement to us as well. And again, I think this is an interesting foresight into what he's really going to build on in chapter 11 about those acts of faith. So let's follow those faithful believers. For when God made a promise to Abraham, and again, we think of the faith chapter, 10 plus verses there about Abraham's faith, Sarah's faith. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit, because this 13 and 14 and 15 raise a question that we want to answer. So when God made a promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself, saying, and this is a quote from Genesis, surely blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply you. And chapter 15 is the question. Because what does it say in chapter 11 about Abraham's receipt of the promises? Look over in chapter 11 if you'd want to refresh yourself.
That he hasn't received them yet?
Yeah, Casey. It says Casey under your name, Becky. Took my brain some time to, no offense there, Becky. Exactly, Becky. That's Hebrews chapter 11, verse. Somebody else feel free to help me out on there. Verse 13. These all, Abraham being key on that in the verses before and after verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. They were persuaded of them and embraced them, and they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare they seek a country, etc., etc. That's Abraham right in there. He died in faith, not having received the promises. So the question that comes to our mind, we're here in chapter 6. He quotes a promise to Abraham, surely blessing I will bless you, multiplying I will multiply you, in verse 15. So after Abraham had patiently endured, what did he do? He obtained the promise. So what promise did Abraham obtain? If we are told a few chapters later, he didn't obtain the promises.
He had a son with Sarah.
Yeah, you're a little hard to hear, but he had a son. Is that right? He had a son.
Yeah, that's what she said.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I was thinking the same thing she just said, that he had a son that he was promised, because that's the only way that he'll get the promise, the real promise when Jesus returns.
Right. And that was exactly my first thought. And then it stumped me because I looked up that quote. Let's look it up. It's in Genesis 22. Verse 17. Let's go over there. Let's see. Debbie Pinkston, would you mind reading 15 through 18?
Genesis 22, 15 through 18. Then the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time out of heaven and said, by myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. Blessing I will bless you, and multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore, and your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice.
Okay. So here's a pop quiz, maybe a tough question. If someone can maybe read my mind and the disconnect here. So Hebrews 6 quotes Hebrews 22:17, saying, surely I will bless thee, and multiplying I will multiply you. Blessing I will bless you, multiplying I will multiply you. After he had patiently endured, he obtained the promise. So we turn to Genesis 22 and we read that in verse 17. Can anyone see, if the answer is, if that promise is the birth of Isaac, does anyone else recognize the disconnect? This is kind of a tricky one, but there is one.
Well, Brad, what comes to my mind is he obtained the promise in the fact that God cannot lie, and he swore by his own name. In other words, and I forget where the scripture is, somebody might remind me, where God often speaks of things that aren't as though they were.
Yeah, we plan to look at that one.
As good as done. If God says, I'm going to do it, and because I can swear by no greater, he has received it. It just hasn't physically fully come to pass yet. And Isaac is just the start of it. That's the front end. It's not the promise. because he was a prophet of the land and everything else. So
right.
that's my understanding of that.
Yeah, I think that is a correct answer. I'll mention what stumped me at first on this one, which kind of took me to where Roger was, among maybe some other thoughts. If obtaining the promise of verse 15 is the birth of Isaac, and the author is quoting Genesis 22, where Abraham is blessed with this offspring, Isaac was born in chapter 21. So Isaac was already born when this quote was given. So it wasn't at that point really a matter of patiently enduring to obtain the promise. Anyway, that threw me for a little bit, I have to say. So I had to give this some thought and try to get at what the author is specifically referring to.
Hey, Brad, do you think it's because he was willing to like you said, he didn't withhold his only son? You think that was since Isaac, you said, was born the chapter before? Mm-hmm. Do you think it's the act that he did, that he was, willing to put Isaac to kill him? You think that has part of to do with that? Maybe that
absolutely displays what the author of Hebrews is talking about here in Abraham's real active faith. Absolutely, Kathy. Where I went, Roger mentioned Romans 4. Let's look at that. Jesus said something similar. You guys all remember this. It's from, we're looking up Romans 4 and Luke 29, 37 and 38. Jesus refers to Abraham, God referring to Abraham as, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying he's not the God of the dead, he's the God of the living. All live unto him. Similar here, Roger quoted from Romans 4. Let's see who's up. Roger, I'll actually let you read that. Romans 4, 17 and 18.
Okay. As it is written, I have made thee a father of many nations, before him whom he believed, even God, who quickeneth the dead, and calleth those things which be not as though they were, who against hope believed in hope, that he might become the father of many nations, according to that which was spoken. So shall thy seed be.
Okay, and they're again talking about his patience to obtain the promises. The way God spoke, I have made you a father of many nations. Effectively, this is saying God can speak in the past tense because the reality of it being fulfilled is that strong. And that's what the author of Hebrews is going to underscore in the next few verses of chapter 6. What I ultimately concluded is, I wanted to recognize that point because I think that is a very real possibility. A lot of times when you're trying to understand an author's message, you kind of want to look for consistency to that audience. So when I'm thinking of the Hebrew audience, I'm also thinking of chapter 11 that says he didn't obtain the promises. So to that audience, this would be confusing, right? So ultimately, what I concluded that it is talking about his offspring. I kind of had to go through this journey of thought to get there, but that it is talking about Isaac and Jacob, because even though it's a quote from after Isaac was born, that promised seed continued. The audience knows full well that these promises were given all the way back to Genesis chapter 12, chapter 15, and so forth throughout Abraham's life about this promised seed. And he lived in faith, waiting for that seed to come. And it did. And Jacob was 15 years old when Abraham died. So he even saw that seed continuing on, multiplying as the promise was. As verse 14 says, multiplying, I will multiply you. I don't, that wouldn't just be Isaac and Ishmael. That certainly goes on to Jacob at the least. So that's where I concluded, is that it is talking about physical seed, but just kind of wanted to run you guys through that path of thought. And as Roger mentioned, that is always a really important thing to recognize, because it speaks to the surety of God's word, that he does not lie, he cannot lie. Chapter 6 is going to speak more to that in the next few verses. And to to the extreme point that when God promises the future, it can be said in the past tense that I have done this, even though it's a long way off. And that's a beautiful, amazing thing that humans do not do, God does. And that really gives us assurance in what he says, because we know without question it's true. Any comments on that?
Hey, Brad?
Yeah, David?
I would just add that I think there's a big point in that the phrase, I mean, if you go back into where in Genesis, that one of the last verses there, it's talking about a seed, okay? And obviously Isaac and Jacob were that seed, but ultimately that seed was Jesus.
Yes.
And in verse 18, it says, and in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. And so I think that's a big piece of it, that all nations of the earth would be blessed. Because if you look at Galatians, I think it's Galatians chapter 3, Paul even says, here in verse 6, he says, even as Abraham believed God, and it was accounted to him for righteousness, know ye therefore that they who are of faith, the same are the sons of Abraham. And the scripture foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles through faith, preached before the gospel unto Abraham, saying, in these shall all nations be blessed. So then they who are of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. And then in verse 14, it says that the blessing of Abraham might come on the Gentiles through Jesus Christ, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. And then verse 16, now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made, and he saith not into seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. And so I think that's a huge part of it. It's not just Isaac, because like you said, Isaac was already born. And Jacob, it was this singular seed where all nations of the earth was going to be blessed. I think that's really a big piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a terrific point, David. That's very much in faith what Abraham looked at. You think of what Kathy mentioned in his sacrifice of Isaac, and you can't read that chapter without seeing Jesus Christ throughout it, and Abraham's recognition of it. And the points I'm making are really specifically to what he did obtain by that quote of verse 14, which is really focused on this multiplying, I will multiply you, unlike where Paul's to the Galatians putting the focus on that singular seed, where he points out that he's not talking seeds of many, he's talking of one, and that's Christ. But what Abraham did obtain is a multiplication of his seed, and that promise even being given at an old age, to the point that Sarah laughed, hence the meaning of Isaac's name, which is laughter. So in verse 16, we start building on this this point of God's unfailing word and unfailing promise. The author's really wanting to underscore these Hebrew believers and us as believers to strengthen our faith in what God says is true and will not fail, no matter the circumstance. Says he relates it again to men, which is interesting. He's already done this at least once, if not twice, in this chapter alone, giving us the perspective that we relate to. Men truly swear by something greater than themselves, and an oath is for confirmation to them to end all strife. So that tradition, we know, continues today. People, you hear it all the time. I swear by God. I swear on my mother's grave. I swear, you hear the swearing happens all the time in society. And I found it interesting. I looked at several commentators on this chapter, Christadelphian authors, Christian authors, and a consistency that I saw among the Christian commentators. I'll tell you in just a bit. Let's look at a couple of references first. Let's go to Matthew 5. And I'll have to say what they said surprised me, because it contradicted what we're about to read. Matthew 5:33 through 37. Leah, could you take that one? It's Matthew 5:33 to 37. Nope, Leah just disappeared. She didn't want to read it.
Clicked the wrong thing.
All right. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say unto you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil.
Okay, so clear message there, isn't it? Don't swear by anything. If you let people believe you. You and I, we claim to be people of, quote, the truth, don't we? Do we use that word? We have to act truthfully if we're going to be people of truth. What we say, what we do, what we post on the internet, you name it, has to be true and reliable, because that's what we claim to follow right here. And it's what we do follow, is what is true and reliable, and that's the Word of God. As people who want to reflect the Word of God, we need to be true and reliable. Do not swear by anything, period, as Jesus is teaching. And let's just make sure we're not picking one scripture that might disagree with others. I always like the quote of proving things by 2 or 3 witnesses. Go to James chapter 5. And see, on my list as I go around the circle, Brian, you're up if you mind taking that one. James 5. And verse 12, James 5:12.
All right, James chapter 5, verse 12. But above all things, my brethren, swear not, neither by heaven, neither by the earth, neither by any other oath. But let your yea be yea, and your nay, nay, lest ye fall into condemnation.
Okay, so we've got some real consistent scriptures here, don't we? James, Jesus, let your yes be yes, let your no be no. What surprised me, and I 2 or 3 different Christian commentators that I looked at, all said that when we read Hebrews 6:16, this tells us that Christians are allowed to swear. The contradiction there from what we read elsewhere, again, that they would say that, just to make the intentional, this is proof that it's okay for Christians, effectively subtly recognizing that Jesus said otherwise, but we read here that people do this, so it's okay. You look at verse 16, it's pretty clear that he's speaking of society. He doesn't say believers can swear by whatever. Men, those around us. And that's men just in the general sense, anthropos in the Greek. That's people. People swear by something greater, to end all strife, making an oath. And any thoughts on that distinction, that in the difference here? I heard someone starting to talk.
I could say something.
Yeah. It's on.
Oh, I didn't know it was on.
We've been mumbling and y'all been listening, haven't we?
I was just thinking about the oath that we take when we get married. That's an oath. You're promising really before God and mankind to stay with your partner until death do you part.
Yeah, and again, that's a yes. That's not I swear on blank that I'm going to stay with you, but that's fulfilling as believers, especially to you and I, the words of Scripture. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Do what you say you're going to do, right? So, but just anyway, I was surprised to read that, and I just wanted to point out that if it's in popular Christian commentators, I mean that included, I don't remember, Matthew Henry was one of them. There was another 1 or 2 I looked at that all made this point, that it's okay for us to swear by something greater than ourselves. I really don't believe Scripture gives us that authority. It's pretty clear otherwise.
I think we can promise.
Sure.
Because
Absolutely.
a promise is based on, to the best of my ability, and if nothing beyond my control changes, I promise to do this. That's to me a yay, yay, and a nay, nay.
Right.
But God was the only one that can swear by himself, because he's created all things. He's already seen the end of time as we understand it. So he's already seen it come to pass. It's just like when Paul was caught up to the third heaven and saw the future. You know, he saw things accomplished. John in Revelations saw things accomplished. Mm-hmm. So, but God knows all those things. And so when he says, I'm going to do this, it's as good as done, because he's already seen the conclusion of the matter. So where we can't see the conclusion of the matter. So we take a big risk to put something on the line like that. So.
Right. And again, the intent of swearing is to say, you know, if you say, I swear to God, that's effectively saying, may God strike me dead if this doesn't happen. Or if I swear on my house, I swear on my car, you know, it's yours if I don't do this. Again, the message to us as believers is that we have to be truthful people. We don't need something else to prove our truthfulness. We have to just be reliable people, period, so that our word is believed and true. And that's a really important exhortation to all of us, because we live in a world, and I tell you what, to be honest, it eats me up. When you look on the internet and you see people, you know, social media posting all sorts of stuff that is blatantly false. They've been duped, they've been deceived, and you just forward whatever thing. We can't do that. We have to speak truth, even if it's these little stupid things on the internet, and I hate to say that, but we are people of truth, period. Our yes has to be yes, our no, no, and we have to be reliable. So don't let that stuff get under your skin, is my exhortation. Leave it to the rest of the world, quote unquote, men to deal with. You know, we're focused on a much bigger, much more important picture, and let's not let these little things distract us. And if we ever need to be distracted, do some real fact checking before forwarding anything on the internet. That's just really important to who we are as believers, that we be truthful.
Hey, Brother Brad?
Yes.
I was just thinking too, in regards to the oath here that God swore, you know, I mean, there is a place for an oath. And to me, like, the only two instances I can really think of where an oath should come into place for Christians is basically when you make an oath to your marriage partner, and then when you make an oath before God, you know, that it's kind of an oath whenever we, you know, make our confession of faith and get baptized, because we are becoming part of the bride of Christ. We're saying we'll be faithful to him until the end, you know. And of course, you can't make that commitment when you're a baby, because you don't know what you're doing. You know, you're not mature enough to make that decision and whatnot. But as an adult, we can make that commitment, which is a promise.
Yeah, sure. And that's just, again, to the point that our word is truth. You know, this isn't swearing by something that we're not holding collateral to our commitment, but we're being truthful and we're fulfilling that. And again, that not only goes for baptism and marriage, Leah, that goes for all points of life as believers. We need to be people of commitment, truth, and faith. But that's a good point. So let's starting to run low on time. Got a few verses to cover here, but not a whole lot. Let's look at verse 17. Again, 16 tells us what men do. 17 relates that to God. So look at God, wherein God, willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability, in other words, the unchangeableness of his counsel, God confirmed it by an oath. So he says that by two immutable things in which it was impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation, who have fled for refuge to lay hold on the hope set before us. Really powerful exhortation here again. Let us know and believe and be assured that what God said is true. Not only has he said that his word's true, he's confirmed by an oath that his word is true, so that we have full confidence, full assurance in what he says, that it will come to pass. So let us hold on to that in our fleeing for refuge in the things of God. So worth looking at. God confirmed his promises by an oath. again, showing the power of his word. And let's look at a few references that indicate ways in which God has confirmed his word by an oath. Let's first look at Isaiah 45.
Brad, while they're turning to that, it's just since what we've been talking about here, we have the word promise and oath.
Yeah.
Same verse, which shows it's like going to the next level.
Right. Exactly.
Not only do I promise. So if there's any confusion in somebody's mind about a promise or an oath, there is a distinct difference, and God makes this distinct difference that I can take it to that level.
Yes.
So I just throw that just jumped out at.
Absolutely. Let's see, have you read yet? Yeah, Brian read. Valerie, would you mind taking this one? Isaiah 45, 22 and 23.
Let all the world look to me for salvation, for I am God, there is no other. I have sworn by my own name, I have spoken the truth, and I will never go back on my word. Every knee will bend to me, and every tongue will declare allegiance to me.
Okay, so there is the example of one who swears by God. And who is that? That's God alone. He swears by himself. Can God die?
No.
Okay, so if God is swearing by God, and it's impossible for God to die, again, that being the intent of a swear, I swear by my head. In other words, if I don't fulfill my word, you can kill me. Who's going to kill God?
Nobody.
Well, a lot of people have tried to.
Right, absolutely, Roger. But it's impossible for God to die. So God swearing by himself shows what about his word?
It can be depended on.
Yes, it's impossible for it to fail. God can't fail. If God's swearing his word by himself, likewise, that word will not fail. Genesis 22, let's look at go back to kind of the context of the promises to our fathers. And David, Pinkston, if you could take that one, you're next on my row here. Genesis 22, 16 through 18.
And he said, by myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice.
Right. Yeah. So God has again sworn by himself. That again, which cannot fail, cannot change, because God will not fail. He will not cease or die or end. And that promise, again, spoke to those two seeds we talked about, both the multiplication in the first half of 17, also that singular seed, which is Christ, who will possess the gate of his enemies, and through him all nations of the earth be blessed, because of Abraham's faithfulness, his obedience and assurance in what God promised him. And one more, and I think this is a real interesting one, is Genesis 15. And that's Jason, if you could take that one, Genesis 15, 17 and 18.
Genesis 15, 17 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates.
Okay, so this one to me is really beautiful. There's a tradition in this time, from what I've read, where two parties, if they wanted to really swear by something, again, in that context, they would offer an offering. They would take an animal and cut that animal in two, and the two parties would pass between the pieces of that animal in making their promise. And that promise means, we have killed this animal, and we're going to stand in the middle of this sacrifice, and we're going to make our promise. The symbolism there is that if I don't hold up my end of the bargain, may I be as this animal. Again, like we've said, swearing by yourself, that's just using the word. If you're physically standing in the middle of an animal that you've killed and cut, ceremonially, that really speaks even stronger to that, doesn't it? So Abraham here was told to take these animals, cut them in two, and he tends to them, takes care of them until the night falls. Abraham basically goes into this deep sleep, and he sees a smoking fire pot and a burning torch passing between the pieces of this animal and making a promise to Abraham. So that's in the exact same way, God putting himself in symbol here in the middle of a sacrifice and saying, my word is so sure and true, may I be as this animal that you've killed. Again, that's using man's covenant for something God can't do. He can't become as that animal. He won't become as that animal. So that is so powerfully assuring to Abraham that this word will not change, cannot change. And I think that's really an interesting and beautiful symbol right there. Any thoughts on that?
I never thought about it that way, but it's a really good point.
So the exhortation again is in Hebrews 6:18. By two immutable things. Yeah, let's see, Roger. Was that Roger?
It's Joseph.
Joseph, go ahead, Joseph.
You made me think of something else I've never thought of before, which is when King Solomon is standing before the two women and he decides to cut the baby in half, and one claims to be the mother and the other one says, go ahead, cut it in two. That makes a lot more sense now that we know that was a practice and a custom to do this. So they were both swearing they were correct and only one was telling the truth.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It would have been more fitting if Solomon had said at the end, cut that woman in half.
You're right.
For not telling the truth, for lying in court.
Yeah. Yeah, good thought, Joseph. So repeating the exhortation here, verse 18, there's two immutable things. For one, it's just God's word, his promise. And when his word goes out of his mouth, it is sure and it's true, it's reliable. He's a God of truth. But on top of that, he's even sworn by himself. He's sworn by a sacrificed animal. His word can't fail. With that oath on top of his unchangeable, unfailing word, again, we have two immutable, two unchangeable things in which it's impossible for God to lie. We who have fled for refuge. And again, these are Hebrews. They know something about the law. When they read the word refuge, what do you think they think about?
Cities of refuge?
Yeah. So what Leah, tell us about cities of refuge. Why did they exist and what did they do?
Well, if you killed somebody by accident, of course, their relatives were going to, want to know what happened. And some might even be tempted to kill you without giving you a trial, kind of thing. So you could flee to a city of refuge. There were 7 of them in Israel, and basically take a refuge there and even have a trial there, but at least you could stay there and not be killed by the relatives until the death of the high priest.
Right. So there's a real similarity there. It's an accidental death, and the person falls under the law, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. They, under the law, also deserve to die for killing somebody else. It's effectively that situation we're in, that we all are born in a state of deserving death, aren't we? So we need to flee to a refuge, to a place where we can have life and hope, and as Leah said, a fair trial, right? And that's God through our Lord Jesus Christ, where we can flee and hold on to, where we have positive promises and hopes that will not fail and will not change, and that we can hold on to. Because as he continues there, which hope that we have is an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, in verse 19. Even says enters into that within the veil, goes into the most holy place where Jesus and God are now in heaven, we can approach. Hebrews speaks more on that later too. So let's close with one last scripture, and I think this is just want to make a contrast here, that this author is talking about our hope in the promises of God as an anchor, as a refuge that is sure, it's steadfast. In other words, it's not going to collapse, it's not going to pull out, it's not going to go anywhere. It is 100% solid and secured into the ground. We can hold on to that anchor to our soul as our hope, because God's word is so true and so strong. So I just want to paint one quick contrast to that. Is keep your finger here and look over at Ecclesiastes chapter 2. See, Christina, would you mind reading that? Do you have it?
I'm at work, so I can't read.
Oh, that's fine, Christina. You were the last one I saw, and Becky's voice has not been coming through very well, so I wasn't going to ask Becky to do it.
I'm going to remute because of work. Sorry.
No, that's fine, Christina. Thanks.
For you, Brad.
Who was that? Kathy? All right, you got it, Kathy. Ecclesiastes 2, 10, and 11.
2, 10, and 11. And whatever my eyes desire, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun.
Okay. Well, I wanted to show that contrast, because here's, again, most likely Solomon, who has not withheld his heart from anything. He has gotten all the stuff that any person could possibly accumulate to themselves. And his conclusion is, it's all pointless and grasping after the wind. So in other words, all the real stuff that we could get, have, and possess, he likens it to grabbing the wind. How's that work out? You know, you're not going to succeed very well.
Grabbing at nothing. You're just, there's nothing there.
There's nothing there. Again, the flesh, naturally sees all of our stuff as real, things that we can hold on to, things that we can really possess. The scriptures tell us that stuff is worthless. That stuff goes away and it has no lasting purpose. But what about the promises of God? Anchor to the soul, sure, steadfast, unmovable, that we can flee to and grab onto and hold on to. That's something real, positive, lasting, sure, that can get us through any challenge in this life, because that's not going to change. It's not going to fail.
Amen.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. And with that, there's a verse and a half left in chapter 6. It really goes right into chapter 7. I already told David Stanley these verses go better for your chapter than mine. So I'm just going to leave the last verse and a half of 6 to Brother David next week. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Research.
Thank you. Brad?
Yes.
I also love Proverbs 18, verse 10, because it kind of is a synopsis of all this. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runneth into it and is safe. And it's because of all that you're talking about. It's such a wonderful.
Thanks so much, Martha. Great to hear from you as well.
Thank you.
Good to see. Oh, the Winfreys just showed up. I got look at me calling you the Winfreys. Getting a little jump on that one. Sorry.
Future Winfreys.
Close enough. Just practicing. I'm practicing.
We just want to say thank you, Brad.
Bye, guys. Good to see everyone.
Good to see you.